What we can do is that try to get the these to sell it.
Utmini ho. Ai. No ho.
Ana kasaya ma. Na fahimta ma.
Ai, acho
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will start at exactly 10:30 as per the program. Thank you very much.
Can you hear? Can you hear them speak? Yes, worried because I can't.
You can't hear them.
No, but if
And the issue, I don't know whether if someone is. One is.
the volume.
Yeah.
So
From the so once you go to the volume,
you can hear.
you can hear you, but unless you increase the volume for this one, that one can also give a feedback. So unless you change the Agyeman, where the volume control is.
This thing is not responding.
It's working, and I said every.
Hello? You can hear me? Okay.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome to this press release of the COVID-19 Rapid Firm Tracker. Those seated in-house here, you are welcome. And those of our friends who are joining us virtually, are also welcome to this meeting. I'm Tony Cracker. I'll be your moderator for this program. I'll quickly run through the agenda for this press release. We will have an opening remark from the government statistician, the UNDP representative, that's Frederick, and then also our World Bank colleague, Laporte Pierre, and also we'll continue with a presentation of key findings by Honorable Professor Samuel K. who is a government statistician, and also continue with discussions. Lead discussant will be Francis Bright Spencer. And then we will have closing remark from our Honorable Deputy Government Statistician, the person, Mrs. Araba Forson. And so we will now zoom into the meeting, the press release with an opening remark from the government statistician in the person of Honorable Professor Samuel K. Thank you, Prof.
And thank you, Mr. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you in-house, we count to the order of about 20. and I see in excess of 50 people who are joining us virtually. We are very much grateful for again joining us for this second wave of the firm tracker. This is an activity that UNDP, the World Bank, and the Ghana Statistical Service deem it necessary to continue to undertake. And as you would all recall, we shared with you the wave 1 results sometime in August. We intend following these same cohort of businesses over time, and the firms that we are following are both business establishments and sorry, colleagues joining us virtually. To repeat what I said we are very much happy to have about 20 people joining us physically and over 50 people joining us virtually for the release of the highlights of the Wave 2 survey of the firm tracker. Together with the World Bank and the United Nations Development Program, Ghana Statistical Service deemed this as very important as the government rolls out several diverse interventions with the aim of abating the challenges associated with COVID-19 from a health perspective, and also the attendant non-health restrictions that came with it. The reason why we are following this same cohort is to help us understand their behavior over time, and it is our knowledge that once we follow them over time, we will be in a better position to track what is making them recover and the rate at which they are going to recover. The results that we're going to share with you is the wave 2 of we intend moving forward doing other industry-specific surveys in terms of the COVID-19 effect, and also following up with the wave 3. So on that note, thank you very much, and I wish all of us an instructive engagement in the next hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. The government statistician. We will now welcome a remark from the UNDP representative Frederick Mugishu, and after that, we'll have that from the World Bank.
Tony, it is the Deputy Resident Representative Zirke Horanda that is representing UNDP.
All right, thank you. And thank you for the correction. Lande, let's hear you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So as we said, it's the second time this year that in partnership with the Ghana Statistical Service and the World Bank, we are bringing to you businesses in Ghana and we present the COVID-19 on the COVID-19 local economy tracker. Businesses, as we all know, play a central role in our lives and in the functioning of governments, both at the national and local level. The fact remains that COVID-19 is still with us and businesses continue to suffer. However, the results of the Business Tracker Wave 2 that we're launching today continued negative impacts of COVID-19 compared to the first wave. Another welcoming development is that the government interventions having reached more businesses compared to the first time the survey was conducted. So it's important that we build on these positive momentums. In this second round of the Business Tracker, we also introduced for the first time information and analysis on the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I'm sure we will hear about this in greater detail in the results presentation. Area agreement and the findings of the tracker on the AFCTA will definitely help to inform decisions and how businesses can leverage the Continental Free Trade Area. The results keep pointing out policy choices, and businesses require more support related to reduced costs of credit, increased information on business opportunities, and removing policy and regulatory bottlenecks. In the end, What we all want is for businesses to build back better, and it's our call to ensure this happens. I want to conclude by reflecting on the next steps. UNDP remains committed to this very fruitful partnership to ensure that we continue to track the impact of COVID-19 on businesses, to allow us to provide analysis that can inform options for action in this evolving situation. And we will continue to work with all partners to support government efforts to help businesses to fully recover from the pandemic. We also want to expand the partnership and work with business leaders to identify and test policy options for businesses across the governance spectrum. And finally, we want to leverage the fact that Ghana is hosting the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area to explore how best to enable businesses benefit from the agreement. So to this extent, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to a fruitful conversation in the next hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Holande. We will now welcome a remark from our second major partner in this exercise, that's the World Bank. So we want to welcome Laporte, Pierre Laporte, to give us a remark. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning to distinguished participants of today's launch of the COVID-19 tracker. Professor Ayew, many thanks for giving me the opportunity to make these introductory remarks. I would begin first by thanking the Ghana Statistical Service and the UNDP for the close collaboration in the conduct of this survey. This survey, as you know, is part of the World Bank's Global Business Pulse survey efforts to measure the impact of COVID-19 on businesses around the world, which has now been conducted in more than 50 countries. Ghana is one of the first countries where we have implemented a second-round survey. The survey shows that even though some improvements have been reported, firms continue to face significant challenges due to the ongoing crisis related to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of reduced demand, difficulties in sourcing supplies, and accessing finance. These have also consequences for jobs and livelihoods of people. Nevertheless, there are also some positive developments. For instance, compared to the previous survey, firms have seem to be more optimistic about the future, even though uncertainty remains. Firms are also adapting the way they operate by relying more on digital technologies, such as mobile money, to sell their products to clients. Ghana's private sector is not unique to the challenges that it faces. The surveys that the World Bank have conducted in other countries show similarly deep impacts and widespread uncertainty about the future. And this poses a huge challenge for governments and us as development partners. The survey shows that the needs of firms remain high, and many of these needs are still unmet. Firms indicate that increased access to finance to help relax liquidity constraints remain a top priority. The World Bank is working closely with the government of Ghana to mitigate the negative impact of COVID, but also to create pathways for long-term recovery and economic growth. Only 2 days ago, our executive board approved an additional financing of $130 million for Ghana's COVID emergency response program. Last week, the board also approved a $250 million credit to boost access to finance for enterprises through the Ghana Development Finance Project and $200 million for the Ghana Jobs and Skills Project. And an additional financing of $115 million was approved in June for the eTransform Ghana project. So supporting digitalization, jobs and skills is also a priority of the World Bank. These are all on top of already existing efforts by the bank in providing emergency preparedness and response funding and IFC investments in Ghana's private sector. More broadly, the World Bank believes that private sector development is key to sustaining economic growth and creating jobs needed for Ghana's young and growing population. In this regard, the Ghana Economic Transformation Project, financed through a $200 million World Bank credit, seeks to promote private investments and firm growth in non-resource-based sectors. This will be achieved through improving the business enabling environment, promoting industrial development, and supporting entrepreneurship and micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. We are also restructuring the bank-financed tourism project that was approved a couple of years back in order to bring financial support to SMEs in the tourism sector during these difficult times. Support to MSMEs will complement the government's own efforts to support business through the Corona Alleviation Program and its MSME Support Fund. Through grants and technical assistance to MSMEs, the project will help firms in their path to recovery post-COVID-19 and will ultimately help boost firm productivity and competitiveness. The improvements in the situation that firms report in this survey present some glimpses of hope, but the challenges that they face continue to be extremely high. Data collected by surveys like these provide crucial insights to understand better what the policy response should be to support firms through the crisis. So the World Bank stands ready to support Ghana in its path to economic recovery as we look forward and work alongside other development partners. So with this, I thank you for your attention and wish you all a fruitful deliberation. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Pierre. We want to thank all our major partners, UNDP and the World Bank, for a wonderful remark. We'll continue with a presentation of the key findings by our Honorable Government Statistician, Professor Akumani. Prof, thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, UNDP and the World Bank, for the introductory remarks that really puts this presentation in its right context. So what we seek to do is to share with you the motivation for follow-up assessment of the firm's performance. As was indicated, the wave one was done in the month of May and June. The results thereafter was shared with you in August. And in the month of August and September, we were able to collect data for the wave two. So in this presentation, it's proper to precede the presentation with what motivated us to look at or to follow up on the assessment of firms' performance, especially in the COVID-19 era. I'll follow this up with notes on methods. I'm going to be very brief on that and spend a chunk of the time highlighting the findings that to then review some upcoming activities as we go along to follow or track the activities of the firms. So the question is, sorry, you can't see the slides?
Yes.
Hi, Frederick.
Are you having issues?
Hello?
I can hear you.
Can you see my screen?
No,
Can you see my screen?
No.
Frederick, is it better now?
Yes. We can see the screen, but start now.
Sorry.
The slides.
Right, so there's this technology challenge we are trying to resolve to get the presentation to come on the screen. So in a few minutes, we'll get it set out, and then Prof will continue the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, house, can we stop sharing on there so that we share it here? Is that okay? And have the same challenges that we had here. Can you see my screen now?
We are good.
Okay, thank you. And once again, please accept our apology. So by way of outline, what we seek to do is to motivate why we are doing a follow-up assessment of firm performance in this crisis era. Then we're going to share with you very briefly notes on the methodology, and we'll follow this up with highlights of the findings and conclude with some upcoming events. So in terms of motivation, we were struck by 5 key questions. The first question had to do with whether the effect of the pandemic had slowed down over time. As you would recall, some restrictions on mobility, especially in Greater Accra and Greater Kumasi area. So we're asking ourselves whether over this period of time, that is from March right down to September, whether the pandemic had or at the effect across, as indicated in the introductory remark from both UNDP and the World Bank. We are aware that there has been impact, but what we are not too sure is whether the impact has been consistent across the different subsectors and whether the pathways by which these subsectors have been affected do vary or not. Then the third motivation is to ask whether firms have intensified their responsibility or recovering mentioned by our colleague from UNDP and the World Bank that some of the firms had put some interventions in place to sort of restore engagement transactions in the face of the fiscal distancing that were imposed. So specifically, we look at issues related to mobile and in lieu of restrictions or the inability to meet face-to-face to transact business. Then the fourth motivation had to do with whether the expectations and aspirations have changed over time. So specifically, we looked at the 2 main outcomes of firms that has to do with sales and employment. And from a pessimistic point of view, an optimistic point of view, we ask ourselves whether these expectations, these aspirations in terms of sales and employment have changed or otherwise. Then finally, we look at, and then again, this was mentioned, we look at the effect of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And to begin with, we ask 2 questions in the area of awareness of it and whether this awareness varies across the different business sizes and also what the expectations are. So as indicated in my introductory remark, we reached out to both household and non-household businesses, and obviously the non-household businesses had the greater proportion relative to the non-household businesses. And the sampling was done by stratifying the selection against 3 broad areas: the regional, the business, the sector, and the different activities that they do within these businesses. The sample was drawn from our Integrated Business Establishment Survey that we have the report dating 2015, the non-farm establishment from the Ghana Living Standard Survey, and the National Board for Small-Scale Industries also augmented the data that we got from our Integrated Business Establishment Survey and the Ghana Living Standard Survey. The rationale was to make up for the small businesses that were not captured in these businesses. As a follow-up study, what that meant was that we're going to look at the sample of businesses that we dealt with in wave 1. And in wave 1, we had 4,311 business establishment that we interviewed. And within the wave 2, we went to these same businesses and were successful in reaching out to 85% of the businesses that we were able to interview during, which meant that we were able to interview 3,658 businesses comprising both household and non-household businesses in the month of August and September. I go ahead to share with you the findings from 3 broad areas. We look at issues related to firm closures. We look at issues related to firms' performance, specifically in the areas of sales and employment. As I indicated, we share with you how the responses, expectations, and aspirations have changed over time. You will recall that in our presentation in August, we indicate firms that had permanently or temporarily closed down ordered up to the number 85,000. By following these same firms and doing extrapolation, we realized that in the month of August, 46,000 firms were still closed down. So the data from the wave 2 indicated that 46,000 businesses comprising both business establishments and household firms were closed down. And from the wave 1, we realized that 85,000. So just about doubling of the number or halving of the number from the wave 1. From the month of August and September, we still have 46,000 of businesses that are closed down. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at this in the context of the 520,000 business establishment that we had from our 2015 exercise, means that still in the month of August, September, we are about 8% of our business establishment that had closed down either temporarily or permanently as a result of COVID-19 or the related restrictions that came. We further businesses that had permanently closed down from both the wave 1 and the wave 2. Recall that during the wave 1, we indicated that 30,000 firms said they had closed down permanently as a result of COVID-19 pandemic from a health perspective or the related health restrictions that came with it. During the wave 2, 17,000 businesses had closed down permanently. One would ask why, if a business establishment is closed down permanently and you conduct a survey over 2 periods, you have a decrease in the number that had closed down. Again, we need to look at this in the context of the phrasing of the question, which posed it to the firms, and with that sense of hopelessness within the COVID-19 or the peak of COVID-19, 30,000 of the firms had indicated that they were not going to reopen or they had closed down permanently. But going back to wave 2, we realized that some of them had reconsidered their decisions to close down permanently, or there were some interventions that had come their way, for which reason they thought that they could go back to their businesses. So we saw that 30,000 as at May, June 2020 had reached the conclusion that they were going to close down permanently, but by following them up in wave 2, based on the total number of firms that we have in the country, 17,000 of them had decided to close down. 30,000 out of the 30,000, the fraction that had reconsidered the decision to close down permanently. We further look at the closure at the subsector, and at sector level, whether it had closed down again prior to COVID-19, that is during the month of March, and during the lockdown period, and also for the month of August, September. And what we realized that across all the sectors, we had closures reduced, right from activities and real estate to agricultural sector. We realized that
there's a slight technology challenge we're trying to address again. Thank you. can look at the screen and talk. I don't know.
And then you will not see, they won't see it. Hi. I think GSS should have been part of this survey so that we'll see how during COVID-19 we've also been able to adapt with technological issues as far as our main agenda of dissemination results are concerned. Colleagues, I'm really sorry about this, but it's really beyond our control. So we're going to move ahead with the findings. And we looked at disruptions in supply of inputs and access to finance. And again, we did a comparison for a 2-time period, that is in the month of May and June 2020 and August and September 2020. And our observation was that across all 3 streams of plausible interruptions, that is specifically looking at difficulty in finding inputs, decrease in access to finance, and cash flow, we realized that there was a reduction over time. And also over time, the proportion of firms indicating the effect of the disruptions varied across the different subsectors. Specifically in the area of difficulty in finding inputs, we realized that the percentage change between the 2 periods varies significantly for the accommodation and food subsector relative to the trade subsector. Specifically, the accommodation and food subsector recorded a percentage difference of 33.9 in the context of difficulty in finding input, while the trade subsector indicated a variation of 2.3. So between the 2 subsectors, we have about 31.6% percentage difference in terms of the difficulty in accessing input or finding input from the wave 1 perspective, that is for the month of May, June 2020, relative to the month of August, September 2020. A similar pattern was also observed in the context of access to finance. Again, we observed stark variations across the subsectors. Specifically, the agricultural and other industry subsector recorded a percentage difference of 23.9 between the wave 1 and the wave 2 in the context of a decrease in access to finance, while when we look at other services, the percentage difference was 4.6. Again, contrasting these differences from the perspective of agricultural and other industries and from the perspective of services, we realize that there is a difference of about 19.3 percentage difference between these 2 sectors. The other area that we paid attention to was dip in sales over the period. And what we did both in wave 1 and in wave 2 was to ask these firms to give us their specific sales for months preceding the data collection period. So for wave 1, which occurred in May, June, we asked for sales for the month of March and April for the wave 1, And for the wave 2, we specifically asked for sales for the months of May and June. And we asked for these sales values for a year-on-year analysis. And what that means is that we collected this data as of 2019 to enable us contrast it with 2020 for the 4 months that I've talked about. On the right panel, what we see is that the change in dip in the month of March on a year-on-year basis, which means that we are comparing March 2019 with March 2020, indicated a dip of 26%. And during the lockdown period, a year-on-year dip in sales indicated 36.0%. This is not surprising to all of us because this is the period that we had restrictions on mobility in the 2 key regions of the country, that is the Greater Accra area and the Greater Kumasi area. In the month of May, that is following the lifting of the restrictions in the 3rd week of April, we also realized that there is a dip of about 25% on a year-on-year basis. That is comparing sales that these firms recorded in May 2019 with sales recorded in May 2020. We realized or recorded a dip of 25.7%. Again, in the month of June, one was expecting that this dip on a year-on-year basis would have been further lower than the dip that we recorded in May, but it came to us that we recorded a dip of 34.7%, which indicated that that dip on a year-on-year basis comparing June 2019 with June 2020 indicates that the sales of we look at this dip in sales from a subsector point of view. And from a subsector point of view, we look at it from the manufacturing sector, from the agric and from the accommodation and food sector, the agric and other industry sector, other services sector, and the trade sector. Across all the subsectors, as indicated in the overall picture, we recorded a dip in our sales. What was varying was the extent to which this dip in sales occurred across the different subsectors, and whether these variations or the extent to which these variations occurred were consistent across the 5 subsectors that we looked at. From a year-on-year basis, the decrease in sales for manufacturing and trade slowed down in the month of May and June compared to March and April, while the reverse occurred for the cases of agricultural and other industries and other services. What this specifically means is that in the month of May and June compared to March and April, we realized that for manufacturing and the trade sector, the dip in sales were lower than what we recorded for March and April. But in the case of the other sectors, specifically accommodation and food, other services, and agricultural and other industries, we realized that the dips in the month of May and June, that is on a year-on-year basis, were higher than the dips that we recorded for the same period for March and April 2020. We go further and look at changes between waves 1 and 2 from a job losses and reduction in wages point of view. In contrast to the 41,952 workers that lost their jobs in the month of May, June, in the month of August, September, we realized that about a quarter of it, specifically 11,986 of these firms had lost their jobs. And this was mainly or predominant in the trade subsector. From the perspective of reduced wages, it will be recalled that 770,124 businesses indicated that their workers' wages have been reduced. Again, we saw a reduction in this figure in terms of businesses that had reduced their wages to the tune of 297,088 workers. Again, in the month of May, June 2020, as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, workers that had a reduction in their wages was to the tune of 770,124. And this during the wave 2 had reduced to 297,088 workers, constituting 9.8. That indicated that in the month of August, September, their wages had been reduced. We further look at the responses of these firms from the perspective of how they are adapting different technologies to accommodate the impact that the restrictions on physical distancing or the scare that is associated with the health implications of COVID-19 had imposed on face-to-face and in-person engagement. And again, we realized that we still didn't have the expected engagement with technology from two perspectives. Again, from an all firm perspective, while we observed close to 2/5 of all firms indicating that they had adopted the use of mobile phone as a coping strategy to mitigate the effect of in-person engagement, during the wave 2, this figure had gone up just by 13%. So we still had just about 50% or half of our firms that had adopted the in the context where in-person and face-to-face engagement had been imposed on us. Again, this did vary significantly across the different subsectors. While in the other services subsector, we did record very marginal, insignificant change between waves 1 and waves 2 of about just 0.4 percentage point. We recorded quite significant variations in other subsectors, with the accommodation and food subsector recording the highest variation of about 13 percentage point. That is why we recorded 26.1 during the wave 1. In the wave 2, we recorded 40.8. This indicates a jump in businesses within the accommodation and food subsector using mobile money as an alternative to the restrictions or in response to the restrictions imposed by in-person engagement. We further looked at the response from the use of internet perspective. And again, for both wave 1 and wave 2, we realized that firms in Ghana are still not adopting the use of internet as an alternative approach. We still realize that less than 10% for both the wave 1 and the wave 2 data that was collected indicated that firms were not using, or it's only 10% that were using internet to address the challenges associated with in-person engagement. Indeed, the percentage reduced during the wave 2, where we recorded 9.0 of our firms using internet as a remedy, as a coping strategy, while during the wave 2, we had a 0.9 reduction, indicating only 8.1% of our firms that were using internet as a coping strategy in view of the challenges or the imposition of in-person engagement. The adoption of internet usage, again, did vary significantly across the subsectors. For both wave 1 and wave 2, we observed that the accommodation and food subsector was the least subsector that had adopted the use of internet as a coping strategy, whereas we had just 1.7 and 5.9 for both wave 1 and wave 2 respectively for the accommodation and food subsector. These percentages were relatively higher for businesses in the agriculture and other industry subsector. Specifically, in contrast to 1.7 that we recorded for accommodation and food during the wave 1, we are 13.5 percentage points for businesses in agricultural and other industry sector. Then during the phase 2, we had 10.2 for businesses in agriculture and other industries relative to businesses in accommodation and food subsector. We then moved on to expectations of these businesses from a sales point of view and from an employment point of view. Again, we looked at this from the perspective of a situation where things will remain as we are, where we call it the regular situation, and from the two extreme perspectives, assuming things get worse in the next 3 months. So in this case, we are looking at it from the pessimistic point of view, and from the optimistic point of view, we are saying that what is going to happen if in the next 3 months things get better. So on the assumption of things getting worse, we did realize that even for those who were pessimistic that things were going to be worse over the period or in future, comparing it with wave 1 and wave 2, we realized that there was a reduction from a sales point of view from 23.5% to 1.7%. Again, this gives us the glimpse of even from pessimistic point of view, the pessimistic about sales reducing had gone down from 23.5% to 1.7%. From the optimistic point of view, the difference was quite negligible, as we observed 25.3 for the wave 1 and 22.6 for the wave 2. Having said that, it's important to indicate that this as well indicated some reduction in the expectations about sales. Then from the employment point of view, similar to the observation that we had from the sales point of view, the pessimists were of the view that even if employment is going to reduce, over time, there's going to be about halving of the extent to which it's going to impact on employment. While we observed that close to 15% were pessimistic about job losses as a result of COVID-19, we had just about half of the same percentage during the wave 2, which indicated that, again, some hope was being built around we overcoming the challenges associated with COVID-19 from an employment point of view. Again, from the extreme end, unlike the sales point of view, where we realized that there was a reduction from 25.3% to 22.6%, from an optimistic point of view in the context of sales, the reverse occurred in the context of employment, where for those who were very optimistic, they indicated that the effect of employment between wave 1 and wave 2 is going to match up to close to doubling of the percentage that were optimistic about that. Specifically, we had 4.3 of them indicating that things were going to turn around very well from an employment point of view during the wave 1, while we had about 8.9 of them indicating that they were pretty much optimistic about the outturn moving forward. We again looked at the desired policies that these businesses would want to have, and this is what we indicated in the outline as aspirations. And for this presentation, we focus on the top 3 policies that the businesses were desirous of. Specifically, we looked at loans with subsidized interest rate, cash transfers, and deferment of rent, mortgage, and utility payments. And again, these are some of these interventions are what the government is looking at as a way of recovering businesses. It came to light during the wave 2 by comparing it with wave 1 that firms were still of the view that they should still get some support from the government in these areas. Whereas we had about 61% indicating that they needed loans with subsidized interest rate during the wave 1. This percentage had gone up by 0.6% during the wave 2, where we had 67% of the firms indicating that they needed loans with subsidized interest rate. In the context of cash transfer and deferment of rent, mortgage, and utilities, we saw similar increases. Specifically, we saw an increase of 8 percentage points for cash transfers between wave 1 and wave 2, and also recorded a 4.0 percentage point for the deferment of rent, mortgage, and utilities. During the wave 2, we had the opportunity to expand on the instrument, and one of the areas that we thought it is important to pay particular attention to are the returns that we all expect to get from the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we looked at this from an awareness point of view, and we had just over a quarter of the businesses indicating that they were aware of the African Continental Free Trade Area. This we thought was very important because it is the basis by which the businesses can harness the returns associated with this agreement, which has its secretariat situated in Ghana. We saw stark variations across the different sizes of firms that were aware of the African Free Trade Area. Specifically, we had about about 3/4 of the large firms indicating that they were aware of the African Continental Free Trade Area, while only a quarter of them, of the small and micro businesses, were aware of this. This has to be looked at in more detail, as the institutionalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area should have equal returns across the different sizes of firms that we have. Again, we looked at the African Continental Free Trade Area from the perspective of the firms that were expectant that this intervention is going to lead to a transformation. And we realized that about 75.6% of these businesses had the belief that they're going to see a transformation in their engagement moving forward. Again, these expectations of transformation vary significantly across the different sizes of firms. While we have close to all the large firms being confident that the African Continental Free Trade Area was going to lead to a transformation in their businesses, we had just about 2/3 of the medium-sized enterprises indicating same, and about 3/4 of the small and medium or micro enterprises indicating that they're going to see a transformation as a result of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The last domain that we looked at had to do with expectations from the perspective of whether the free trade continental area is going to lead to reduction in the cost of trade, and it's going to lead to other interventions such as information perfection and completion across the different businesses that we had. This was a multiple response question, and we had about 44.6% of the firms indicating that as a result of the African continent being of the bane that businesses in the country have contended with over the period. So it is refreshing to hear that businesses are of the view that as a result of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is going to lead to a reduction in the cost of credit. Other areas that businesses were optimistic that the agreement is going to help bring about had to do with increase in information, where we had about 41% of them indicating so, and a third indicating that as a result of the African Continental Free Trade Area is going to lead to a removal in the bottlenecks associated with the policies and the regulatory framework that we have. We had just about 7.4% of them indicating that as a result of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is going to lead to digitization of the way we do things, especially enhanced internet connectivity across the continent. With this detail, we share with you highlights of the Wave 2 firm tracker. From the Wave 2 firm tracker, we realized that 3 to 4 months after the lifting of the restrictions related to the COVID-19 pandemic, 46,000 firms are still either permanently or temporarily closed down. And this figure compares with 85,000 that was recorded in the month of May, June 2020. There is a glimpse of hope, as was indicated earlier on, since we found out that given that some firms had permanently closed down mentally during the Wave 1, as a result of the follow-up that we did, and possibly as a result of the interventions that have been instituted, 50% of those that had indicated permanent closure during the Wave 1 had reopened and were going about with their normal business. The year-on-year dip in sales for all firms was higher in June than in March and May 2020. Again, during the 4-month period that we assessed relative year-on-year dip in sales, it was only during the restriction, the month of the restriction, that we saw the highest dip in sales of 36%. But in the month of June, we recorded a dip in sales of 34%, which was higher than what was recorded in March and May 2020, respectively, with the figures of 24% and 34%. The manufacturing subsector recorded the least dip in sales for both the month of May and June 2020. An estimated number of 11,986 workers lost their jobs in the month of August, September 2020. This compares with 41,952 that had indicated loss of jobs in the month of May, June. Again, this indicates a glimpse of hope, as about a quarter that had indicated loss of jobs in May, June reduced to 11,986 for the month of August, September 2020. In this context, the trade subsector was the predominant or the most hit sector. We go further to share highlights from the perspective of workers that had experienced a reduction in their wages from the viewpoint of May, June 2020 and August, September 2020. More than 297,088 workers indicated that in the month of August, September 2020, they had had their wages reduced. This compares with 770,124 workers that indicated reduction in wages in the month of May, June 2020. Use of technology as a response to the challenges imposed on fiscal distances doesn't seem very good for us, as we still see less than 10% that have adopted the use of internet, and also just only half of them that had adopted the use of mobile money as a coping strategy, given that we had to institute fiscal distancing. Additional firms that desired subsidized interest rates based on loans that they receive, cash transfers, and deferment of rent, mortgage, and utilities were recorded. Specifically, we saw that 6% more of the firms had indicated that they needed loans with subsidized interest rate. And in the context of cash transfers, we had 9% more firms indicating that they would want to receive cash transfers for recovery as a recovery strategy. And from the perspective of deferment of rent, mortgage, and utilities, we had an additional 4% of the firms indicating that they needed the deferment of rent, mortgage, and utilities. From the perspective of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we realized that of the 520,000 firms that we have in the country, 137,000 of the firms were aware of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Of this, it was size firms. From the perspective of the benefits that we're going to accrue from the African Continental Free Trade Area, we realized that firms that were aware of the free trade agreement were optimistic that it was going to lead to a reduction in the cost of credit. It was going to lead to information available to the way they do things, and were less optimistic that it was going to enhance the use of technology as a result of making internet widely available. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. We will now move on to questions and answers. And so we will welcome your questions. You would raise your hand and I'll invite you to ask your questions. Okay. Yeah. Please come closer to me. Come here. Or just take it off.
Hello. So my name is Eben Sabachi from JFM. My question has to do with the 13,000 that have reconsidered their decision to close down. Close down. I don't know what kind of interventions have they received and what made them reconsider this decision. I want to know. And then also the 86,000 that have not, they are not certain yet as to whether they will open or not. Or can you tell us if they have any reasons for that, and whether they have any plans of diverting into different areas? So for instance, if it is an agric SME, maybe you want to do housing, or you want to do something in hospitality as a result of the environment you find ourselves. Thank you.
Any other question, please?
I mentioned my name.
Yeah, mention your name, man.
Okay, so my name is Eric Mawena. I work with Star FM. With the loss of jobs, we saw a reduction in the numbers of individuals who had lost their jobs, but we also saw a corresponding number of firms who initially said they were closed temporarily, but decided to come back after some interventions. Is it the case that we're seeing the number of job losses reduce because these individuals work for these firms? What is accounting for the reduction in the number of individuals who have lost their jobs?
Any other place? Any other from the?
Yes, the name is.
All right, so let's say. Please speak up a little bit.
The name is Justice Adewale. Yeah. Maybe I glossed over when you were mentioning the sectors that were most hit by the impact. So I would like to know, in your survey, which sectors were most hit in terms of the impact that you've mentioned. Thank you.
Prof, maybe you have to take these 3 questions so that we can go for an asset.
Okay, thank you for those questions. So the first question is related to the reasons for some of the firms reopening. I must indicate that this was not anticipated ahead of the Wave 2 data collection, because prior to the Wave 1 data collection, we're clear in our minds that once a firm had indicated permanently closed down, because we had 4 different responses in terms of the status of the firm in association with COVID-19. The first response had to do with whether the firm was fully opened, and we had 2 questions in between that tried to gauge whether it's partially opened or temporarily closed. This was to give us a sense of whether some of them were not too sure and they were going to go back to their business activities or otherwise. And the 4th category had to do with permanent closure. So prior to undertaking the study, we thought that once a firm indicates that it's permanently closed down during Wave 1, in Wave 2, we expect this firm to have closed down. But it came up that at the start of the data collection for Wave 2, some of the firms that did not indicate partial close down or temporarily opened, but indicated permanently closed down, had gone back to their businesses. At that time, we had started the data collection, so we didn't have the opportunity to ask questions related to what led to their reopening, whether it was as a result of the government stimulus that had been rolled out or some other interventions. But given that we have the intention of following up with these firms during Wave 3 and possibly beyond that, these are definitely issues that we're going to follow up on. And that is what a cohort analysis allows us to do. We can always go back to these firms to get some of the issues that are coming up. So for the same reason, for the 86,000 that we indicated from the phase 1, we are unable to tell whether they're moving forward, they're going to diversify their engagement or otherwise. But definitely we're going to reach out to these firms during the Wave 3 of the data collection. I move on to the 3rd question on which of the subsectors were heavily hit or were hit the hardest as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As indicated during the Wave 1 release of the firm tracker, the accommodation and food subsector continued to be the highest or the hardest hit in terms of COVID-19. While we realized that the manufacturing and trading subsectors had a reduction in the dip in their sales, the accommodation subsector recorded a very marginal difference in dip in sales over the 4-month period. So by comparing year-on-year dip in sales for March, April, May, and June across the 5 subsectors that we looked at, the accommodation and food subsector indicated a marginal reduction in dip in sales. And this confirmed the fact that it is the hardest hit subsector across the 5 subsectors that we looked at. The question on loss of jobs, reduction in wages as against firms that have permanently closed down and have reopened is something that definitely moving forward we need to look at. As it stands now, we've looked at these variables in isolation. So we looked at the variable in the context of firms that had permanently closed down and had opened in isolation of those that indicated that they had laid people off and those who said they had re-engaged or re-employed people. So in my concluding remark, one of the things that I'm going to talk about are the next steps or the analysis that we're going to do. Definitely, we're going to go beyond these univariate analysis and begin to look at how we can compare behavior of firms across different variables. And certainly one of the areas that will require attention is to map those who had laid off people, those who had re-employed people, as against those who had closed down permanently and reopened, to see whether there's some alignment from these perspectives.
Thank you, Prof. We are going to go around with another set of questions. So please, if there are any questions, any person in house here to ask questions, or you raise your hand wherever you are, try to ask a question virtually. Okay. Name and then.
So, Ben Sabuti again, Joy FM Journeys. I just want to find out, when you look at the reports, in the area of government interventions, about 30% of the firms who did not receive the support says they are not aware of it. I just want to know what's the collaboration between the Ghana Statistical Service and some of these agencies, i.e. the NBSSI, the ministries and those agencies, so that some of these researches can be incorporated in their operations. I just want to know. Thank you.
Any other questions, please?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. And so when we look at the employment, like the job losses due to COVID-19, how does that impact on the unemployment situation in the country, at least temporarily within this period?
My name is Pius. I report for Class FM. Looking at the data you presented, I would like to focus my question on the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, where you mentioned that 26.2% are aware of the CFTA. This is mind-boggling because the traders are, if you like, are the sources for which reason the CFTA will be implemented. How striking is this development?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again. These three questions are very important in the area of disseminating the findings from this study so that will help put the findings in its right context. I'll start with the last question in terms of whether the 26% of businesses indicating that they are aware of the Continental Free Trade Area is an issue that we should worry about. Indeed, this came to us as something unexpected because, as you rightly said, the benefits of, or the intended benefit of the Continental Free Trade Area is enormous and has been touted as such. So one would expect that firms and businesses should be aware. Once we've found out this, we've taken steps to ensure that we intensify sensitization on the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to ensure that businesses and firms in Ghana can leverage and benefit from the returns associated with it. Discussions between GSS and UNDP has already ensued in that regard, and this is one of the findings that we've immediately shared with the Ministry of Finance, and it is our expectation that it will subsequently be shared with the relevant ministries, specifically the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So we expect that firms in Ghana should fully be aware at least of this intervention, and we are hoping that once they are aware, then they will be educated on the strategies, the pathways by which they can harness the returns associated with it. The second question in relation to employment, unemployment, again, is a very important, and we need to deal with it in the context by which this data has been collected. Employment, unemployment issues can be looked at from two perspectives, either from the supply perspective or from the demand perspective. What we've done from the business tracker, the firm tracker, is to look at employment from that perspective by asking firms, workers that have been laid off, those that have lost their jobs as a result of that. In contrast to what we do from the Ghana Living Standard survey, we ask the questions from the demand side, and we ask questions specifically related to those who are not engaged in any activity or are neither seeking or available for work, to classify them as unemployed. So one has to be careful the way we want to contrast the employment, unemployment, job losses that we find from a supply point of view and also what we get from a demand perspective. Having said that, it's always important to ensure that these two figures that we get speak to each other. Currently, we are unable to do that because the last time that we did it from the Ghana Living Standard survey point of view was in 2017, and this data is giving us as at 2020. So despite the fact that the sources of information, the methodologies, the approaches are different, the issue of time lag is something that one also has to be careful about. So in that regard, GSS is circumspect or reluctant in making any inferences to say that the job gains or the job losses that we are seeing here would either go a long way to reduce or increase the unemployment or employment situation that we have in the country. The third question is in the area of collaboration with MBSSI. I must say that as we engage now, there isn't any formal structured modes of engagement with the National Board for Small Scale Industries, but given COVID-19, some informal discussions ensued, and that was led by the Ministry of Finance. And with the findings that we are getting from both the wave 1 and the wave 2, specifically with the 30% that you mentioned that some businesses are unaware of the government stimulus, it's something that we're going to share with the National Board for Small Scale Industry. And we are hoping that even by this platform, they're going to be aware of it through our website. They're going to get access to the detailed report to know exactly where these firms are, that is those who are unaware of the stimulus, to engender better targeting of the firms that are unaware of the government stimulus. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. We are going on to another set of questions. Let's invite to the Achampon to ask a question. Mr. Achampon. Unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think that was great. I just have two quick maybe suggestions for the next wave of the survey. One on the AFCTA. It will be interesting to find out how prepared the firms are themselves in actually taking advantage. So they do talk about the advantages, but what is not immediately clear is what sort of preparation they are making to take, care of or take advantage of the opportunities that come. So perhaps a follow-on question in the next survey would be to tease out the preparation of the firms to take advantage of the AFCTA and whatever bottlenecks, etc., that needs to be addressed. And then another one on the use of the internet. I'm quite interested to find out why are firms not necessarily using the internet as a means of transaction, particularly given that mobile improvement rate and connectivity rates have sort of picked up in the last couple of years. So again, I think it'll be interesting in the next survey, if there is, just to tease out a bit more about the challenges firms and individuals are having in using the internet as a means of transaction, more so given the whole government digitalization initiative, and of course Ghana Beyond Aid, and then getting more revenues into the treasury. So those are just my two suggestions for the next wave. But I think it's a very important study that you've done, and kudos to the team.
All right, thank you, Mr. Champon. We would take a few questions to close the sessions on questions. Please come here, come this way.
So I want to get this one also clear. When you talk about 26% of businesses being aware of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, now, the data we've gathered, does it cover a substantial part of the trading community in Ghana? So that if my headline, for instance, goes 26% of Ghanaian traders aware of CFTA, would that
Take the last question. Last question, prepare virtual audience. Otherwise, if you can have another question from the audience seated here, that'll be fine. Any other question, please?
Once again, thank you very much for both questions. The suggestion on going further on the African Continental Free Trade Area to ask questions related to preparedness is indeed the right direction, and thank you very much for re-echoing it. Definitely during the wave 3, we're going to do an assessment of the preparedness of the firms to take up the returns associated with the agreement. In the area of the internet usage, again, this is one area that we've done minimal work on in terms of harnessing the scope of questions that we have on internet usage in the instrument. Indeed, we ask questions related to challenges, hindrances that are associated to their use of internet, and we are happy to collaborate with any individual or organization that is interested in analyzing these variables that we are yet to look at to ensure that we make full use of the returns of the data. So thank you very much about that, and we'll go ahead with it. In terms of the sample, as I indicated, the sample, confidently we can say that it's representative of the firms that we have in the country, because we used the census of business establishments that we conducted in 2015. And in addition to that, from our Ghana Living Standards survey earlier on, that gives us a sense of the household firms that we have in the country. So we didn't look at only non-household firms, specifically business establishments, but we went ahead to complement that with household firms, household enterprises that we get from our Ghana Living Standards survey. We didn't end there, but as I indicated in the introductory remark, we went ahead to sample based on information that we got from the National Board for Small-Scale Industries, because we realized that we might be skewing our sample if we're going to limit it to data from the Integrated Business Establishment Survey and the Ghana Living Standards Survey. So we had to complement it with data from the National Board for Small-Scale Industries so that we can get a good representation for businesses at that level. So confidently, we can say that of the 3,685 firms that we interviewed during the wave 2, as against the 4,311 that we interviewed in the wave 1, it's a good representation of the firms that we have in the country.
Thank you very much, Prof. Before we have the closing session, closing remark from our honorable professor, I want to take this opportunity to correct one error. Pierre Laporte is not just the country director for Ghana, but is the country director for Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Thank you for that correction. And so in absence of any other question, we want to invite Prof to give us a closing remark.
Show the slide on the upcoming activities. Thank you, Tony. I'll precede my closing remark, which I reserve the upcoming activities for the closing remark, by saying that the remark from UNDP and the World Bank is very promising, because these are the two agencies that we've been engaged with for both the Wave 1 and the Wave 2 data collection exercises. And from those remarks, they both indicated their committed interest, their considered view that we need to continue to engage with these businesses and possibly expand the sample, given that the issue of the African Continental Free Trade Area is something that we need to look at. And also there are other issues that moving forward we need to engage with. So this gives us some assurance at Ghana Statistical Service that definitely we're going to continue to engage with these businesses and firms moving forward, either by looking at the issues that we've shared with you or expanding the scope of issues that we are engaging with. Again, the question that came up on our engagement with other agencies, specifically the National Board for Small-Scale Industries, puts this work in a better perspective. And moving forward, we hope to engage more with other agencies beyond the United Nations Development Program and the World Bank on the findings or the conduct of these surveys, to ensure that as the state agency mandated to collect data to ensure that Ghana's development is underpinned with statistics, would be relevant in that regard. In terms of upcoming activities, we want to collaborate, as I indicated, with either individuals and agencies to further analyze the 70 variables that we have in the survey. During the wave one, we did indicated that the questionnaire has over 70 variables that we can further engage with. Clearly from the wave two, we've had the opportunity to add on more variables. This gives us a wider scope to engage with the variables that we didn't mention them in the presentation. Some of the specific issues that we would want to delve into moving forward is one, to determine the factors that either independently or jointly influence the effect of COVID-19 and related responses on sales and employment of firms. The other area that we want to touch on is to assess the variations in sales and employment from a much broader perspective. Now we've looked at it only from the size of the firm perspective, but it will be important to look at it from other background characteristics such as the legal status of the firm, the geographical variations that we have in the country, and other background characteristics that are important, such as ownership, in understanding how firms are able to cope with crises such as COVID-19. Other area that we would want to collaborate with other agencies and individuals to conduct further analysis on is to estimate the net impact of COVID-19 on sales and employment of firms. We've talked about all these things in isolation, but it's important that as a country, we get a sense of how summarily COVID-19 has impacted on sales and employment of firms. This will mean that we need to bring all the different outputs, outcomes, performance indicators of firms together to get a sense of the net impact. The fourth area that we think it will be important to look at is to examine the effectiveness of the innovative strategies. Yes, firms are using mobile money, firms are using internet, but we still beg the question as to whether these interventions that they are putting in place are really effective or otherwise. And lastly, it will be important to have a good sense of the response of the government stimulus that we've had in terms of whether that is what has really contributed to the reopening of some of the firms that during the wave one, they indicated that they had permanently closed down. On this account, there is room for us to go ahead with the wave three of the business tracker and also do some more specific industry analysis, such as how COVID-19 has impacted on agribusinesses. We take this opportunity to thank all firms that have participated in both wave one and wave two of the survey. And even for those that were unable to participate during wave two, once we are doing a cohort analysis, they can rejoin during the wave three. So we encourage all of them, that is the 4,311 that we engaged during wave one, to be on board if we're going ahead with the wave three of the analysis. For the data collection personnel, we are very much appreciative. And for the audience that we have virtually, I see that we've successfully sustained the interest of close to 70 people virtually, and we have over 20 people in-house that we've engaged. We hope that you further disseminate the results from this study to ensure that it's put to its right use. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you very much, everyone. Just want to do one correction. The Syke Hollande is the Deputy Resident Representative of the UNDP in Ghana. Thank you very much. So thank you all for participating.